NFL rankings 2021, next position, offensive tackle. I know offensive line can be a little bit boring to some people, but I disagree. I think it's still really interesting, and more importantly, it's very important. Obviously, offensive line play dictates a ton. Everyone saw the Super Bowl last year, which is maybe the greatest indicator of why that is important to all the teams in the NFL. So going through the top 20, some notes. Don't consider injuries. Point of this exercise is to talk about what makes a player good when they're on the field and noting the differences in good, decent, or elite players and why that is. So while injuries obviously do impact the actual NFL season, this is more about when a player is on the field, who helps your team win the most. And that goes for not necessarily technical skill, but just who is better. Because there are going to be players on here, especially offensive line, where I think a lot of people boiled down to technique equals good or technique equals like ability, which just isn't the case. I only care about what the result is of the player when they're at offensive line for your team. Just for this 2021 season, so age not a big factor. It's just how good you're going to be this single year. Obviously not fantasy rankings for offensive linemen, and there are no rookies. Once they get on the field, I can tell you how good they are until it's an NFL field. I don't much care. First five out. Jake Matthews, Braden Smith, Andrew Whitworth, Donovan Smith, Orlando Brown Jr. There are a lot of good tackles in the NFL still. All of these guys are players you are better than fine with starting. Obviously, this is including two positions being left and right tackle, so they're going to be more starters than there are at some of the other positions like running back, tight end that we talked about. But these guys all still good. This is no slight against them. And one player I will say who's not going to appear on this list is Mitchell Schwartz, just because I'm not sure if he's even going to play this year or even in the NFL with his whatever's going on with his injury. I think it's like a bad back thing. If he was playing, though, if he was healthy, he would slide in at number 4 in the top tier, just if you're looking for him. So, yeah, let's get into it. Top 20. Starting at number 20, Dwayne Brown for the Seattle Seahawks. Dwayne Brown had a reputation, especially a couple of years ago, as being better than this. Now, again, remember, top 20 is offensive tackle in the NFL. It's really good. All these guys are really, really, really good. And what does Dwayne Brown gives you? He gives you a pass protector who's going to basically be up to the task against all but the most elite rushers, which is a little bit of a common theme until we get to the kind of the top 10 area, where these players are really good as long as you don't throw like the elite pass rushers at them. Then they'll have issues. Now, that goes for, again, everyone outside the top 10 really, but just a thing to note, that definitely applies to Dwayne Brown. What keeps him lower than these other guys? Not a notable run blocker at all, just really mediocre at it. Then we have Teron Armstead, player who age has caught up with a little bit, being he was so shockingly athletic when he came into the NFL. His issues basically at this point mostly lie actually pass protection, despite that being what his strength was for most of his career. Now, he's still definitely good in that area, but he has some kind of notable issues. He's not super strong at this point, and he can be beat a little bit to the inside, which is more of an interesting thing, given some of those athleticism. As a run blocker, those two are really, really good, gets out in space really well, and that's going to be a thing, too. It's important to know with these run blockers, because I think that is actually maybe a little underrated how good these tackles are. Pass protection, obviously, much more important still, but run blocking is still definitely important, even in the modern NFL. That actually determines most of how good your running game is how good these guys are at it. So the skill in that specific respect, too, that I think is pretty clearly the most valuable is their ability to do it in space. And getting pushed to the line of scrimmage is both not terribly hard or unique to any player and also not incredibly valuable to like the total over attempts running production of your team. Now, it is definitely important, but being able to eliminate second level defenders, I would argue, is pretty clearly more important. And that's something Teron Armstead does, why he's in the top 20. Next, two rookies here, Tristan Wirfs, Jedrick Wills, shockingly similar players in terms of borderline dominant run blockers already, really, really good. As back protectors, they have more, I think, mental issues. And if there's any position where I actually expect improvement, I think most skill position players are more or less who they are when they get to the NFL. Obviously, they get a little bit better, but offensive line, I think, is a position you see the most growth, and I wouldn't be surprised if these guys end up in the top, both of them in the top like 5 to 10 within the next couple of years. But yeah, as of right now, still some mental issues, pass protecting. They can get beaten more than most of the guys ahead of them, and they are really good as run blockers, but there's still some holes there. Garrett Bowles, kind of the opposite, actually. Borderline, like elite pass protector. As a run blocker, he's pretty whatever. He's better than Dwayne Brown, but really good as pass protector. He notoriously had penalty issues for most of his career, of course, with the Broncos. But even when he was doing that, he was still, I would argue, pretty damn good. And a lot of those calls were questionable at times, to say the least. especially when you compare it to the way, other tackles would play. I don't think he was necessarily doing anything much worse. But yeah, they didn't called, and people all of a sudden were like, oh, hey, he's really good. He is really good. Number 15 in that same tier, last one, we got Taylor Decker, a player I think is underrated because he's been on the obviously bad Lions. And look, the Lions, as we go through these offensive line rankings, have a really good, like a top 5 offensive line in the NFL, and Taylor Decker is a big part of that. He's not a super flashy player, which obviously is not unique among offensive linemen, but I do think it's important to know that it's more important for an offensive lineman to not suck than it is for them to be really good on any given play. I know there's a lot of people that talked about that concept, but, because anytime an offensive lineman kills his assignment, especially in pass protection, it doesn't actually necessarily make a huge difference to the play, but anytime they fail, it is instantly catastrophic mostly. So Taylor Decker never sucks, basically, in any given play. There are a couple times where he can still get beat. He does still a little run into the problem that I talked about earlier where, like, against elite guys, he's not great. But overall, I mean, he rarely, if ever, loses to anything beyond the best of pass rushers. And his run blocker, he's pretty good, too. So then we have a tier jump. Tyron Smith. Tyron Smith is a player who, before his play last year, I would have had way higher. I think injuries pretty clearly were affecting him on the field. And the difference between, I talk about injuries not mattering is I don't think they're going to go away in this instance. They're more like long-term back issues and that type of thing. And at his age, he showed with his play on the field last year that he's a lot more vulnerable as a pass protector than in past years. Still really good. Still in the top 15 here as a run blocker. He's really good. There's a reason the Cowboys have had such a dominant running attack. Now, obviously, they have other good linemen, but he's a big part of that. So, yeah, really good. Next, probably the one I'm most excited to talk about in this whole list. Rookie last year, Mekhi Becton. Wow, he's really good. He was good instantly, too. I mean, for a guy that big to be that good in pass protection that quickly is stunning, really. Really reminiscent of Trent Brown, the player we're going to talk about a little bit later. He doesn't lose, and he also kills people in the run game, and he moves so well for guys. I mean, he is such a huge positive when he's on one, a tackle for your team. You're talking about a side that's going to provide very little pressure to your offense because of how good he is, and is going to be a guaranteed positive in the run game. That's a big deal. Then we have Brian O'Neill, actually really similar. Now the way he looks is way different. From one of the biggest guys in the NFL, though, one of the smaller tackles in terms of weight. He was a lot more of a finesse player, but the effect's very similar. Dominant pass protector, and as a run blocker, he's up there with the very best as far as eliminating guys on the second level. Now, I will say why he's maybe a little bit or not quite as high as some other guys is he's not perfect in pass protection, and the offense he plays in does kind of lend itself to him looking very good, getting into space because it's all he's doing a lot of time. Now, that's not necessarily a big knock because he could do it really well, but that's kind of why he's a little bit lower. Larry Tunstall, I think, is the best example of anyone on this list of that whole concept of never sucking. He just never loses bad. Now, he still has, this is kind of the end of where we talk about guys that have issues with the top pass rushers. Larry Tunstall still does a little bit. You can see when he plays elite guys, but anything other than that, he's going to basically shut them down. And while he's kind of whatever as a run blocker, he's fine there, and he's been limited in that instance too by a horrible running scheme that the Texans have been going with for a couple of years. So, yeah, Laremy Tunstall, you're just set there. You're not crazy, but you're pretty much set if he's on one side for you. Then the top 10 here. Number 10, player's been really underrated. I don't know if a lot of people even know his name. Taylor Moton just got franchise tagged by the Panthers, I believe, unless he signed a bigger extension. Really good. He is really similar to actually the guy that I just talked about, and Brian O'Neill, and even Tyron Smith to an extent, serves these athletic space blocking outside tackles. He's just also borderline elite in pass protection. His cracks show up a lot less than all the guys we talked about so far in terms of even against the most elite rushers. Now he's still not perfect. There's a reason he's not in the top, a couple tiers here, but really good. And as a run blocker, while his push at the line isn't great, like I talked about, he's pretty damn good in space, and that provides a lot of value. Jack Conklin, I will say, compared to all the other guys in the top 10, is probably the worst of the pass protectors. Now he's still very good at it. And the thing he's vulnerable to, which is kind of true speed rushers, that don't actually exist too much at the upper end in the NFL at this point. There's just kind of the Bozas, and then you get into tiers of guys like Dante Fowler and Yannick Ngakoue, who are just not all that scary regardless because of how quickly the ball gets out at this point. But, yeah, because he's so good at doing everything else, and because he's an actual dominant run blocker, yeah, super valuable. Then we have a tier jump. Only 2 more tiers left. So at this point, you're talking about really, obviously, really big positives for your team. Number 8, Lane Johnson, player who's dominant as a space run blocker on the edge, as a pass protector, very rarely loses. Altogether, a really good player. He's just, again, he's a little bit weak at the line of scrimmage, like a tiny bit. He's still good there for sure. But compared to the other guys in the top 10, and as a pass protector, same thing where he can get pushed in the pocket a little bit more than the guys ahead of him, but really good. Don't forget about La'el Collins. Missed all last year. That guy's real good when he's on the field for the Cowboys. They really missed him without him playing. And, La'el Collins, incredibly valuable tackle. He just doesn't lose, like, ever, really. We'll see, obviously, if he's fully healthy, but according to this exercise, I'm going to assume he is. And if he plays like he did a couple years ago, yeah, really dominant player. Same thing with Trent Brown ahead of him. When he's not actually on the field, he is dominant 100%. He's like Mekhi Becton minus all of the rookie mental mistakes that Becton barely makes those either. But Trent Brown's just incredibly good when he plays. And as a run blocker, he's so catastrophic as an edge run blocker when he's able to, in 1 or 2 motions, take a defensive end or outside linebacker just out of a play and then still affect a guy at the second level with the chance of just eliminating that guy from the play too. Crazy stuff you'll see from him. And while injuries are an issue for sure, like I said, I don't necessarily include that when he's on the field healthy. He is this good. And the Patriots got to steal that trade with the Raiders that they made. I think they got him for like a 5th-round pick, the 6th best tackle in the NFL. It's wild. Taylor Lewan, another player who tore his ACL last year. And missed a lot of it. He is really good when he plays. Exceedingly good pass run blocker, and as a pass blocker, just almost never loses. Yeah, just really good. Number 4, Ronnie Stanley. There are people who are going to argue for Ronnie Stanley being higher, especially if you look at whatever production stats you use for an offensive lineman. I don't really like those a lot of times because offensive linemen, just like every other position, production is so context driven. But yeah, I will grant you that Ronnie Stanley just doesn't lose in pass protection. Now, he's not asked to do super crazy things there, but that doesn't mean you can't see, what he does do. It's not like the Ravens never throw the ball. And, yeah, when he's on the field, also a player towards ACL last year, but when he's on the field, exceedingly good, and a player just doesn't lose. And for him to be able to provide as much value as a run blocker he does while, like, never losing pass protection, really good. And also, like I said, right after him would have been where Mitchell Schwartz would sit in this next year. So, yeah, then we have the top 3, the top tier tackles in the NFL. Number 3, Trent Williams. Yeah, and he's a big part of the reason why I've kind of decided anymore that I don't necessarily think injuries / like missing time makes a whole lot of a difference, to be honest with you, how good a player is, because even at his age, whatever, 31, or maybe he's even older, and skipping a whole year, basically the year prior to this one, he came in, was the 3rd, arguably even a little bit higher, best tackle in the NFL. Exceedingly good, dominant as a run blocker on the edge, does not lose in pass protection. Outside of some last year, I will say, during the first couple of weeks, he had some weird issues, which that I would probably attribute to the missing time thing, but that only lasted a very small amount of time, and even then it wasn't like a big problem. But yeah, now when he got back up to full speed, you can clearly see how incredibly good he is. He just kills people all game, every game. Number 2, David Bakhtiari, best pass protector in the NFL. As a run blocker, I actually think he's, in the top 10, he's probably down there with Ronnie Stanley is the worst, but that's not a huge, when we're talking about the top 10, that's not a huge detriment. He's still fine there. And just as a pass protector, he just doesn't lose, like, literally ever. And that's what puts him this high, because that is obviously exceedingly valuable skill as a tackle in the NFL. And number 1, pretty confident in this. I could have argued for putting him in his own tier. Ryan Ramczyk of the Saints. He goes crazy. He just doesn't lose ever, and he nominated just like these other guys. He just kills people all game, every game. So not a ton more to talk about. The top 20 tackles. These guys, again, all of these guys really good, including the first 5 that I mentioned that didn't even make the list. So, top 20 tackles in the NFL for 2021.